So picture this. It's November 2004, right? And the most advanced sensor array on the planet, strapped to a multi-million-dollar United States Navy F/A-18F Super Hornet, detects something that, well, something that simply shouldn't exist.
Yeah, and we are not talking about, like, a blurry light in the sky or a trick of the eye here.
No, exactly. We're talking about a physical object tracked by multiple military radar systems.
Hmm.
An object dropping from 80,000 feet, which is, the absolute freezing, breathless edge of space, all the way down to sea level in a matter of seconds.
It's staggering when you actually look at the numbers.
Right. And today, we aren't just asking if people saw something weird. We're doing a deep dive into the hard, unforgiving military data, and we're asking a much more dangerous question, really, like, is our understanding of physics fundamentally broken?
I mean, it is the ultimate question
Yeah.
because when you strip away the Hollywood aesthetics and the cultural baggage and obviously the internet conspiracy theories, you are left with a profoundly complex scientific and intelligence puzzle.
Yeah, a puzzle that doesn't want to be solved.
Exactly. And the USS Nimitz encounter you're describing is, well, it's a watershed moment because of the sheer volume of corroborating data. Like, we have Commander David Fravor's eyewitness testimony, sure, but we also have the Princeton cruiser's SPY-1 radar, the E-2 Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft, and the Super Hornet's own targeting pods.
It's not just one guy seeing it die.
Right. And what all those sensors recorded challenges the fundamental conservation laws of our universe.
And that challenges basically the core mission of our deep dive today. If you're listening to this, you've probably seen the headlines, you've heard the debates. We want to take you on a journey through a really rigorous interdisciplinary evaluation of unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP.
UAP, yeah, the new acronym.
Right, because we want to figure out, do the strange behaviors reported by these pilots require us to completely rewrite the laws of thermodynamics and gravity? Or, when we put these events under a microscope, can they be explained by human ingenuity, highly classified tech, and maybe the occasional but spectacular glitch in the system?
We really have to maintain the tension between those two possibilities. The mundane reality of sensor artifacts acts as a very heavy counterweight to theoretical paradigms like metric-engineered space-time manipulation.
Which sounds like a mouthful, but we'll get into it.
We will, but to even have that debate, we need to define the playing field first. Like, what exactly is a UAP doing that a conventional jet cannot do? The military and intelligence communities use a taxonomy called the 5 observables.
Right, the checklist for the impossible. I want to walk through these, but I don't just want to list them. I really want to understand why they break the rules.
Okay.
So let's start with number 1, sudden or instantaneous acceleration.
Okay, yeah.
We're talking about objects shifting from a dead stop to hypersonic speeds in fractions of a second. To put that in perspective for you listening, a highly trained human fighter pilot in a G suit typically blacks out around, 9 Gs?
About 9, yeah. The blood simply cannot get to the brain fast enough.
So 9 Gs breaks a human.
Yeah.
But we are talking about UAP exhibiting hundreds, sometimes thousands of G forces, right?
Exactly. But it's not just a biological limitation. It is a structural materials problem. Even if you remove the human pilot entirely, making it a drone, an airframe constructed of titanium or advanced carbon composites will physically shear apart, rivet by rivet, long before it reaches 100 Gs.
So the metal just turns to confetti.
Pretty much. The kinetic energy required to impart that much momentum into a mass instantly, it would require a propulsion system that we simply cannot engineer.
Okay, so that leads right into number 2, which is hypersonic velocity without visible signatures. So let's say an object does somehow survive the G-force of going Mach 5, which is like over 3,800 miles per hour. If I'm driving my car down the highway at 70 miles an hour and stick my hand out the window, the wind resistance is massive. Moving at Mach 5 should literally rip the air molecules apart. Why aren't we seeing that?
Because of the physics of atmospheric friction and compression. In a conventional hypersonic flight, the craft is physically ramming into the air molecules in the atmosphere.
Like a snowplow.
Right, like a snowplow pushing snow. The craft is pushing the air out of the way so violently and rapidly that the air compresses. And this extreme compression generates a shock wave, which we perceive as a deafening sonic boom.
But there's no boom with UAP.
No boom. And there's also intense aerodynamic heating in normal flight. The skin of a hypersonic missile can reach thousands of degrees. It leaves an ionized plasma trail and a massive thermal signature on infrared cameras. Yet these UAP are recorded moving at these incredible speeds in complete silence.
Silence and cold.
Exactly. with no thermal blooming on infrared and without burning up.
Which honestly makes no sense unless they aren't interacting with the air at all. But I'll put a pin in that because the number 3 is a low observability, or cloaking. They actively evade our best multi-sensor tracking. A pilot might see it perfectly clearly with their own eyes out the canopy, but the radar screen in the cockpit is totally blank.
Or the opposite.
Right. The radar is screaming that an object is right there, but the infrared camera sees absolutely nothing.
It's selective invisibility. And it suggests either an active electronic warfare system that perfectly spoofs specific electromagnetic frequencies, or, a physical property of the object that absorbs or bends radar and light waves entirely.
Which brings us to number 4. And mechanically, this might be the most perplexing one of all for me. Transmedium travel.
Moving from space to air to water.
Seamlessly, like without splashing.
Without splashing, exactly. To understand why this is an observable, you have to look at fluid dynamics. The aerodynamic drag of the atmosphere is vastly different from the hydrodynamic drag of the ocean. Water is roughly 800 times denser than air.
800 times.
Yeah. So if a physical craft hits the surface of the ocean at hypersonic speeds, it is mathematically indistinguishable from hitting a solid wall of concrete.
It would just flatten.
The structural deceleration forces would vaporize a conventional vehicle instantly. Yet, the data suggests these objects plunge into the water and maintain incredible speeds beneath the surface, completely ignoring that fluid resistance.
And lastly, number 5. Positive lift, or anti-gravity-like behavior. Flight without wings, rotors, or jet engines. We see them just sitting there.
Hovering.
Yeah. Hovering in hurricane-force crosswinds, totally stationary, ignoring the basic principles of aerodynamic lift that keep every single 747 and fighter jet in the sky.
Yeah.
So those are the 5 hurdles. But before we start throwing around terms like anti-gravity, we need to establish some ground rules for our evidence.
Yes, very important.
Because, let's be honest, the internet is full of blurry dots that people claim are flying saucers.
Yeah, completely. Evaluating this phenomenon requires a very strict epistemological hierarchy. We need to distinguish between empirical, verifiable data and, cultural speculation. At the absolute top tier, the gold standard, we have confirmed sensor data.
The machines.
The machines. We're looking at instrumental recordings. Co-registered data from Navy ANAT G79 active electronically stand array radars and forward-looking infrared systems like the Raytheon ATF-LIR pods.
And why is that the gold standard?
Because this data isn't subject to fear, excitement, or memory distortion, it provides hard, objective numbers for velocity, range, and thermal output.
But even sensors can be wrong, right? I mean, my phone's GPS thinks I'm in the river half the time. A piece of software can glitch.
Absolutely, which is why the next tier down is so critical: pilot and eyewitness testimony. The human element provides the necessary contextual narrative that a radar screen simply cannot.
It's like, what did it actually look like?
Right. Accounts from highly trained military aviators and radar operators tell us what the environment looked like, how the object behaved tactically, and how the sensor data actually correlated with physical reality.
But human memory is famously terrible.
It is. We must ruthlessly apply cognitive science here. Human testimony, regardless of the observer's pedigree, is vulnerable to perceptual distortions. In a high-stress, split-second combat aviation scenario, interpreting distance, speed, and size against a featureless background like an empty blue sky or the ocean is incredibly prone to error.
Okay, so sensors first, then pilots. What about government reports? We see these congressional hearings and unclassified documents dropping all the time now.
Official government acknowledgement sits just below testimony. Formal documentation released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence or the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, is vital.
Because it means the government actually cares.
Yes, these agencies confirm that unresolved military encounters exist and pose actual operational hazards. But we have to read them carefully. They explicitly state that these objects remain unidentified, not that they are definitively extraterrestrial or non-human.
Right. Unidentified just means we don't know what it is. And then at the absolute bottom of the barrel, we have the media and pop culture. And for this deep dive, we're totally ignoring that tier.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, we aren't interested in speculative leaps that turn a radar blip into an alien invasion. Because in science, we have to respect Occam's razor.
The simplest explanation that requires the fewest new assumptions is usually the right one.
Exactly. So to figure out what these things are, we have to start at the bottom of the explanatory ladder and work our way up.
I call this the hierarchy of plausibility. We must exhaust the mundane before we invoke the extraordinary. So, Tier 1 is conventional explanations. And we must be intellectually honest here. The overwhelming majority of UAP sightings, well over 90%, are successfully resolved right here in Tier 1.
So we are looking at airborne clutter, like trash in the sky.
Yes. Meteorological balloons, large consumer drones, commercial payloads, radar reflective debris caught in high-altitude jet streams. Even unique avian migration patterns, flocks of birds, can trigger radar returns that initially appear anomalous.
Okay, but Tier 1 isn't just physical objects in the air, right?
Correct. It includes the sensors themselves. The most advanced imaging systems in the world can generate highly deceptive signatures, optical illusions, and software artifacts.
I really want to dig into this because it's easy for someone to just wave their hand and say it was a sensor glitch, but it's much harder to prove it. But we actually can prove it with some of the most famous UAP footage out there. Let's look at the 2014 and 2015 USS Theodore Roosevelt encounters.
Ah, yes.
Everyone knows the Go Fast video. You watch it, and it looks like a glowing, pill-shaped object rocketing across the surface of the ocean at unbelievable speed. The pilots in the audio track are literally losing their minds trying to lock onto it. If I watch that just as a normal guy, I think it's a UFO.
As would anyone not trained in avionics telemetry. The Go Fast video is the perfect case study for Tier 1 analysis. The visual is undeniably compelling, but the screen is filled with numbers, range, altitude, angle of depression, and the speed of the jet filming it.
Data overlay.
Right. When physicists and trigonometric analysts take those specific numbers and apply basic geometry, the entire narrative collapses.
Walk me through the math on that. How does an object looking like it's going Mach 3 turn out to be moving slow?
It is the effect of parallax.
Parallax, okay.
Parallax is a visual illusion created when a fast-moving observer looks at a slow-moving object against a distant background. When you crunch the telemetry data on the Go Fast screen, you find the object wasn't skimming the water at all. It was actually at a very high altitude, roughly 13,000 feet.
Wait, so it was high up in the air, not down by the waves.
Correct. The jet recording the video was flying high and fast above the object, looking down at it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so because the jet was moving rapidly and the camera was tracking the object against the distant static background of the ocean surface far below, the ocean appeared to be whipping past the object. It creates the mathematical illusion that the object is moving incredibly fast relative to the water.
That makes so much sense. It's like when you're sitting on a train, right? You look out the window, and a fence post near the tracks seems to fly by at 80 miles an hour while the mountains in the distance barely move.
Exactly.
The fence post isn't moving, the train is. So the object in the Go Fast video could literally just be a balloon drifting in the wind.
Almost certainly. The calculations put its true speed at roughly 40 knots, perfectly consistent with high-altitude wind speeds in that region. The hypersonic speed was entirely an artifact of human perception and camera angle.
That is a massive reality check.
Yeah.
But what about the gimbal video? That's from the same series of Navy encounters. In that video, you clearly see a dark, saucer-like shape flying against the wind and then literally stops and the whole craft rotates on its side. A weather balloon doesn't rotate like a flying saucer.
No, it doesn't, but a camera lens does.
A camera lens?
Yes. To understand the gimbal video, we have to look intimately at the hardware recording it. The Raytheon NSQ 228 ATF-LIR pod.
Okay, break down what a pod actually is for me.
Think of the ATF-LIR pod as a highly complex telescope and infrared camera mounted inside a glass housing strapped to the bottom of the fighter jet. Because the jet is constantly banking, rolling, and changing direction during flight, the camera inside the pod is mounted on a series of gimbals pivoting rings that allow the camera to rotate independently of the jet.
Oh, so the camera is essentially on a robotic neck that can twist around to keep looking at the target.
Precisely. Now, when the pod needs to track an object that crosses a specific threshold relative to the jet's position, an event known as crossing the gimbal roll, the internal mirrors and lenses have to physically rapidly rotate to prevent the internal wires from tangling and to maintain the track.
So how does that make the object look like a flying saucer?
The object we are seeing in the gimbal video is viewed through an infrared camera. We are not seeing the physical hull of a craft, we are seeing its heat signature. Most analysts believe the jet was tracking the extremely hot exhaust plume of a conventional but distant aircraft flying away from them.
Like the tailpipe of another jet.
Exactly. The intense infrared glare of that engine exhaust takes on the shape of the camera's internal aperture. It looks like a blob. Crucially, when the jet maneuvers and the camera's internal mechanism rotates to track the object, the glare on the lens rotates with it.
Wait, are you serious? So the physical object miles away isn't doing a physics-defying sideways rotation. The glass and mirrors inside the camera underneath the Navy jet are twisting, and it just makes the blob of light on the screen twist.
That's exactly it. It is a mechanical artifact of the sensor system. When you look at the background noise in the video, the faint atmospheric artifacts in the sky, they rotate at the exact same moment the craft does. A physical craft rotating wouldn't rotate the clouds behind it.
Man, that is actually kind of frustrating, but incredibly necessary to understand. So Tier 1 wipes a huge amount of data off the board right away. We've got parallax illusions, camera gimbals rotating, thermal inversions making ships look like they're flying. But what happens when we have a case that actually survives Tier 1? Like there's no camera glare, it's not a balloon, it's a real physical thing doing physical maneuvers. That moves us to Tier 2, right? Advanced human technology.
Yes. If it is not a glitch, we have to ask, is it a highly classified, unacknowledged aerospace development program? Black projects. Global superpowers are constantly developing next-generation technology. We have to consider stealth, uncrewed aerial vehicles, extreme endurance drones that can loiter for days, and hypersonic glide vehicles, or HGVs.
Now hold on. We established earlier that a hypersonic vehicle moving through the air generates a massive thermal signature. If the Navy sees an object moving at Mach 10 with no heat trail, it can't be a Chinese or American HGV, right? Because physics says it has to be hot.
Correct. An HGV doesn't perfectly fit the no-signature observable. But Tier 2 isn't just about physical propulsion. It is also the realm of bleeding-edge electronic warfare and directed energy deception. Have you ever heard of plasma stealth?
I have, and honestly, it sounds like something straight out of Star Trek. How does a military actually use plasma to fake a UFO?
It is a very active area of defense research. It involves using high-power microwaves or laser-induced breakdown. Essentially, you take an incredibly powerful laser, either mounted on an aircraft or a ground station, and you focus the beams on a specific targeted coordinate in the empty sky.
Just pointing lasers at empty space.
Yes. The intense energy strips the electrons from the air molecules at that exact spot, ionizing the gas and igniting a glowing sphere of plasma.
So you're basically creating a localized floating ball of lightning using a giant laser pointer.
That's a great way to visualize it. And these plasma spheres are incredibly useful for military deception. First, because they are composed of ionized gas, they can absorb or deflect incoming adversarial radar waves, acting like a shield. Second, they generate their own radar returns and infrared heat signatures.
So the enemy sees a target on their screen.
Exactly. But here is the most important part regarding UAP observables, because you are not moving a physical object with mass, you are just steering a laser beam through the air to ignite the plasma at different coordinates. You can move the glowing sphere across the sky at the speed of light.
Ooh. Because it has no mass. It's literally just light.
Exactly. To a radar operator or a pilot looking at it, it perfectly mimics the rapid kinetic movement of a physical craft. It can display sudden acceleration, zero radius turns, and instant stops because there is absolutely no physical inertia involved. It's just a dot of heat moving across a screen.
That is brilliant. It generates a radar return, it emits visible light, it shows up on infrared, and it moves at impossible speeds without a sonic boom because it's not a solid object pushing air, it's just energy. So if I'm skeptic, I stop right here. I say, look, it's balloons, it's camera glare, or it's a classified American plasma hologram spoofing our own Navy to test their reactions. Case closed. We can all go home.
It is a very comforting, empirically sound conclusion for the vast majority of cases. However,
this is where I have to step in and push back.
Please do.
I am fully on board with camera gimbals and plasma balls. I really am. But I keep coming back to the 2004 Nimitz encounter. Let's look at the specific behavior of that 40-foot white tic-tac. Commander Fravor engages it, it vanishes. And seconds later, the Princeton's radar picks it up 60 miles away.
Right.
But it didn't just fly to a random spot. It flew to Fravor's highly classified Encrypted Combat Air Patrol, or CAP, rendezvous point. It was literally waiting for him.
And that is exactly the detail that breaks Tier 2.
Right. A thermal inversion doesn't fly to a designated coordinate. A radar spoof or a laser-induced plasma decoy doesn't perfectly anticipate a highly classified, cryptographically secure meeting point miles away and hover there. It implies an intelligence, a level of situational awareness, and a physical capability that completely shatters the boundaries of conventional tech. We aren't just dealing with a glowing ball of air. We are dealing with something that outsmarted a Navy strike group.
I agree completely with your pushback. You have hit on the exact threshold where the mainstream scientific consensus begins to fracture. When Tier 1 and Tier 2 are empirically falsified by what we call the hard residue of data.
Hard residue, I like that term.
Yeah, it's situations where multi-sensor networks, trained observers, and interactive behavior track kinematics that are flat out impossible for human technology. When we hit that residue, we are forced to ascend to Tier 3.
So if it's not a glitch and it's not a drone, how is it moving?
If it is accelerating at thousands of g-forces without a sonic boom, the only logical conclusion is that it is not pushing through the air using conventional propulsion. It is moving by bending the fabric of reality itself. We must leave the conventional aerospace world behind and enter the realm of space-time engineering and metric manipulation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Space-time engineering. We all learned in high school that the speed of light is the universal speed limit. Nothing can go faster. And we learned that if you want to accelerate a heavy object, you need a massive amount of energy, and you're going to generate massive g-forces.
Yeah.
How does Tier 3 get around the fundamental laws of the universe?
By using Albert Einstein's general relativity as a loophole.
The loophole in Einstein.
General relativity teaches us that space and time are not just an empty, fixed grid where things happen. Space and time are a single, interwoven, dynamic fabric space-time, and this fabric can bend, warp, stretch, and compress. Think of a bowling ball resting on a trampoline. It warps the fabric around it.
Right, creating gravity.
In 1994, a theoretical physicist named Miguel Alcubierre published a mathematical solution to Einstein's field equations that essentially provided the theoretical blueprint for a warp drive.
The Alcubierre metric. This is legendary stuff. But how does it actually work? How does it bypass the speed limit without breaking physics?
Alcubierre demonstrated that you could mathematically formulate a geometry where the space-time fabric expands directly behind a craft and contracts directly in front of it. The object sits inside what we call a locally flat warp bubble. The key insight here is that the craft itself is not moving through spacetime. It is the fabric of spacetime itself that is moving, carrying the bubble and the craft inside it along with it.
So the ship isn't flying?
No. General relativity states that no local object can move through space faster than light, but there is no limit on how fast space itself can expand or contract.
Okay, I want to make absolutely sure this makes sense to everyone listening, because it requires a really profound shift in how we think about movement. Let me offer a simple analogy. Think of a surfer on the ocean.
Okay.
If you watch a surfer catching a wave, the surfer is not swimming forward at 20 miles per hour using their arms. The surfer is standing perfectly still on the fiberglass board. It is the wave, the medium of the water itself, that is physically moving and carrying the surfer forward.
That's a very good visual.
Or, to make it even more everyday, think of one of those flat moving walkways at a large airport terminal. You step onto the belt, you put your bags down, and you stand perfectly still. You are not walking. You are experiencing zero physical exertion. But to someone standing over by the coffee shop watching you, you are gliding forward effortlessly at 5 miles an hour. You are stationary, but your local environment is moving you.
The airport walkway perfectly illustrates the concept of the local inertial frame. The craft inside the warp bubble is standing on the walkway. Now, if we apply that concept back to the 5 observables we discussed, metric engineering elegantly solves almost all of them simultaneously.
Let's test that. Observable number 1, sudden acceleration and impossible g-forces.
If a craft is enclosed in an Alcubierre bubble and the space-time around it shifts instantly, an outside observer, like a Navy pilot, sees instantaneous, impossible acceleration. But inside the bubble, the payload remains in a local flat inertial frame. Because it is the space moving and not the craft, the occupants experience absolutely zero g-forces.
Yeah.
The craft could go from 0 to Mach 20 instantly, and a pilot inside wouldn't even be pushed back into their seat. A cup of coffee on the dashboard wouldn't spill a drop.
That is mind-blowing. But it makes perfect mathematical sense based on the walkway analogy. It solves the structural problem completely. But what about the sonic boom? Hypersonic velocity without signatures. If space is carrying the bubble at Mach 20, why isn't the bubble smashing into the air and making a massive shockwave?
Because of metric decoupling. Within a metric-engineered bubble, the intense warping of spacetime creates a boundary. As the bubble moves, the atmosphere, the physical air molecules slide around the warped boundary of spacetime. They never physically hit the hull of the craft. Since the craft isn't colliding with the air, there is no compression. No friction means no heat buildup, no ionized plasma trail, and critically, No shockwave.
It's literally parting the air around it like a force field. And I assume that exact same principle explains transmedium travel, plunging into the ocean.
Precisely. The bubble isolates the vehicle from the medium. When crossing from the thin air of the sky into the dense water of the ocean, the spacetime geometry deflects the water around the boundary. It prevents fluid resistance and mechanical impact. The craft doesn't crash into the water. The metric simply slides the water out of the way, allowing it to maintain a constant speed across vastly different physical environments.
It's the ultimate skeleton key for the UAP mystery. It even explains low observability, doesn't it? Because if you are warping space, you're also warping light.
Yes. The intense space-time curvature required to compress space in front of the craft acts as a massive gravitational lens. We see this in astronomy all the time. Massive galaxy clusters bend the light of stars behind them. If a craft is wrapped in intensely curved spacetime, incoming light rays, infrared emissions, and radar waves would be bent completely around the bubble rather than reflecting off the craft's surface. To an outside observer or an AN/APG-79 radar, the object would appear visually distorted, heavily cloaked, or entirely invisible.
It bends the radar wave around it like a rock parting a stream. So we have this elegant, mathematically validated theory that neatly checks the box of almost every single impossible observable. So why aren't we celebrating? Why is this still Tier 3 speculation instead of established fact in a physics textbook? What's the catch?
The catch is that while the Alcubierre metric is mathematically permitted by general relativity, the physical requirements to actually build it are completely unphysical based on our current understanding of the universe. Generating that warp bubble requires astronomical inputs of what physicists call negative energy density, or exotic matter.
Okay, stop right there. What is negative energy?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you just made it up for a sci-fi movie. Is it antimatter?
No, it is not antimatter. Antimatter has normal positive mass. It just has an opposite charge to regular matter. Negative energy is a theoretical concept where a region of space has less energy than a total vacuum. It possesses antimass. In classical physics, this violates standard energy conditions, specifically the weak energy condition, which essentially states that mass and energy must be positive. If you have negative mass, gravity becomes repulsive instead of attractive. That repulsive force is what is needed to expand the space-time behind the craft.
I'm guessing we don't have a jar of negative energy sitting in a lab somewhere.
We do not. We can barely generate microscopic fleeting amounts of it using quantum effects like the Casimir effect, but the scale required for a warp drive is the real problem. Early calculations by physicists suggested that to warp space-time enough to encapsulate a macroscopic craft, you would need an amount of negative energy equivalent to the entire mass energy of the planet Jupiter.
Wait, hold on. If it takes the mass of Jupiter, doesn't that essentially render this entire theory useless? Are we just doing chalkboard math at that point, or is this a realistic aerospace hypothesis?
It is a valid criticism. More recent, refined theoretical models have reduced that energy requirement significantly down to the mass of the Voyager spacecraft, or perhaps a few hundred kilograms of exotic matter. But the fundamental problem remains. We have absolutely no idea how to macroscopically generate, store, or stabilize negative energy. It is technologically unsupported by any laboratory physics.
So metric engineering gives us a beautiful how, but it fails spectacularly on the with what. It assumes that an intelligence has somehow mastered the manipulation of our specific four-dimensional space-time. But what if the object isn't fully operating within our universe's rules to begin with? What if the reason it appears to break our physics is because it isn't fully from our physics?
This leads us directly to the boundary of Tier 4, the realm of higher dimensional physics and brain cosmology. When we step into Tier 4, we are moving from manipulating our known dimensions to interacting with dimensions we cannot even perceive. Modern theoretical physics routinely utilizes extra dimensions.
You're talking about string theory.
Yes, string theory and its unified expansion, Edward Witten's M theory. For decades, physicists have been trying to unify the gravity of general relativity with the subatomic rules of quantum mechanics. In the 1920s, Kaluza-Klein theory proposed a hidden fifth dimension to unify electromagnetism and gravity. Today, superstring frameworks require 10 dimensions to maintain mathematical consistency. M theory requires 11 dimensions.
11 dimensions. I mean, most of us struggle to parallel park in 3.
Right.
How does this model actually view the universe?
These models propose that fundamental particles are not tiny dots, but rather microscopic vibrating strings or extended membranes, which physicists call brains. Within this framework, our entire observable universe, the 3D space we move in, and the time we experience, is modeled merely as a three-brane. It is a three-dimensional membrane embedded within a much larger, higher-dimensional space called the bulk.
The bulk. I
Yeah.
love this concept, but it's incredibly difficult to visualize an 11-dimensional bulk. If you're trying to picture this, it's almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
But we can use an analogy to understand the absolute limitations of human perception. I want to use the flatland analogy. Carl Sagan popularized this, but it was originally written by Edwin A. Abbott back in the 1880s.
It is the perfect tool for this explanation.
Okay, so imagine a perfectly two-dimensional world, a universe consisting only of length and width. Think of a giant sheet of paper. The residents of Flatland are living geometric shapes, squares, triangles, circles sliding around on this flat plane. They have length and width, but absolutely zero height. They have no concept of up or down. Now imagine that a three-dimensional object, a solid apple or a sphere, descends from above and pushes perfectly straight down through that 2D flat plane. What do the 2D residents see?
They cannot look up to see the sphere descending because up does not exist in their universe. They can only see the cross-section that directly intersects their flat world.
Right, so if I'm a flatlander, I don't see the sphere. When the bottom of the sphere first touches the paper, I see a single tiny dot miraculously appear out of thin air. As the sphere pushes further through the plane, that dot rapidly grows into a larger and larger solid circle. Once the widest part of the sphere the equator passes through, the circle starts to shrink back down to a dot. And then, when the top of the sphere clears the paper, it abruptly vanishes completely.
To the residents of Flatland, this event violates every known law of their 2D physics. An object materialized, continuously shape-shifted its size without adding or removing 2D mass, and then teleported out of existence. But we, looking down from the 3D perspective, know it was perfectly mundane. It was just a normal sphere passing through a slice of their world.
So if a 4D or 5D object is hovering over my house right now, I literally couldn't see it unless it dipped down and intersected with our 3D space.
Precisely. That analogy is mathematically perfect for translating higher dimensional intersections into the UAP observables. If an object exists in a higher spatial dimension and it intersects our 3D brain, its behavior would appear profoundly anomalous. Let's map this directly to the data, the phenomenon of UAP blinking in and out of existence.
Oh yeah, like they just pop into reality.
Exactly. If a 4D object moves along a higher spatial axis, stepping up or down out of our 3D brain, it would appear to instantly materialize out of nowhere and dematerialize in our 3D space. It is simply entering and exiting our spatial slice, just like the sphere in Flatland.
And what about shape-shifting? Pilots frequently report objects morphing from cubes to spheres, or changing their structural geometry mid-flight.
If a complex higher dimensional object is rotating or maneuvering while passing through our 3D hyperplane, the 3D cross-sectional projection that we can actually see would continuously morph. Just as a 3D cylinder passing through a 2D plane at an angle would look like an ellipse that stretches and changes shape, a rotating 4D object would mimic structural mutability in 3D.
This also beautifully explains apparent instant acceleration and passing through matter. Let's say UAP wants to get past a mountain. In 3D, it has to fly over it or around it, which takes time. But if it can move through a higher spatial axis, taking a shortcut through the bulk, its true speed might be completely normal. But in our 3D projection, it appears to teleport from point A to point B instantly, completely bypassing the solid matter of the mountain because it simply went over it in a dimension we don't possess.
And brain cosmology offers a very specific theoretical mechanism for the anti-gravity observable. This relates to how the fundamental forces operate in string theory. In these models, the forces of electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force are mediated by what are called open strings.
Okay, open strings.
The crucial detail is that the ends of these open strings are permanently anchored or stuck directly to our 3D brain. This means you, me, our radar waves, the atoms of our aircraft, and light itself are trapped on this sticky paper universe. We cannot leave the 3D brain.
But gravity operates differently.
Gravity is the exception. Gravity is mediated by closed strings or gravitons. Because they are closed loops, they have no ends to anchor to the brain. They are free to leak off our membrane and bleed out into the 11-dimensional bulk. In theoretical physics, this leakage is often cited as the reason why gravity appears so incredibly weak compared to the other fundamental forces it is being diluted across extra dimensions.
Okay, so how does a UAP use that?
If an advanced technology could manipulate this higher dimensional geometry or alter how locally concentrated those gravitons are, they could theoretically control that leakage. They could plug the leak or widen it. By altering the effective gravitational mass within our 3D brain, they could decouple from Earth's gravity, achieving positive lift and hovering effortlessly without any thermal exhaust.
So the critical takeaway here is that from our limited 3D perspective, the object is breaking the laws of conservation of momentum and thermodynamics. But within the global geometry of the 11-dimensional bulk, the object is following the rules perfectly. The physics violations are just perceptual artifacts.
Correct. It is a purely physical geometric explanation.
Okay, but as dense and complex as higher dimensions are, they are still fundamentally nuts and bolts explanations. It's still hardware moving through space, even if that space is an 11D bulk. But some researchers argue that focusing only on hardware completely misses the most truly anomalous aspect of the data, and that is how UAPs seem to interact with the observers themselves.
The human element.
Right. They anticipate actions, they mess with human perception. This leads us to the most controversial part of Tier 4, the outliers: consciousness models and nonlinear temporality.
This is where we step away from traditional physics and enter the philosophies of mind and cognitive science. To even entertain this, we must look at how science views consciousness. Mainstream science operates on physicalism, the orthodox view that consciousness is entirely an emergent property of neurobiological processes in the brain. The brain creates the mind. In this view, if a UAP encounter bypasses physical sensors and only affects the pilot's mind, it must be a hallucination.
Right. If the radar doesn't see it but the pilot does, physicalism says the pilot is just stressed and seeing things.
But there are competing philosophical views that have gained traction in theoretical circles. Dualism argues that mind and matter are distinct substances, allowing for mind-matter interaction. Panpsychism posits that consciousness is a fundamental property woven throughout all matter, like mass or electrical charge. Even an electron has a rudimentary subjective experience. And analytic idealism, championed by modern philosophers, suggests that the physical universe is actually just the external manifestation of a transpersonal, collective conscious mind. Reality is fundamentally mental.
Okay, analytic idealism sounds a bit esoteric. Let's bring this down to a cognitive model we can chew on. I want to talk about Donald Hoffman's interface theory of perception. Hoffman is a cognitive scientist, and his theory completely upends how we think about reality. He argues that evolution did not design human senses to see objective reality.
It is a radical departure from standard evolutionary assumptions. We usually assume our eyes evolved to show us the truth of the world.
Exactly. But Hoffman uses game theory and evolutionary mathematics to prove that evolution only cares about one thing: fitness payoffs. Keeping you alive long enough to reproduce. It prioritizes fitness over truth. If seeing the objective truth of reality takes too much processing power and slows down your reaction time, you get eaten by a tiger.
The analogy he uses is brilliant. He compares human perception to a computer desktop. When you look at your computer screen and see a blue folder icon in the corner, you don't actually believe there is a physical blue plastic folder inside the computer monitor. The icon is a simplified user interface designed to hide the incomprehensible, complex underlying reality of diodes, resistors, and gigabytes of binary code.
Right, the interface keeps you from being overwhelmed, so you can easily send an email or save a file. If you had to toggle millions of microscopic switches to write a document, you'd never get anything done. Hoffman's math suggests that our entire perception of 3D space, time, and physical objects is precisely that a biological user interface. Space and time are just the desktop. Physical objects are just the icons. We don't see reality as it is. We see the simplified evolutionary icons that keep us alive.
So if we apply the interface theory to UAP, the implications are staggering. Anomalous events might not be physical spaceships flying through the binary code of reality. They might represent glitches in the interface or direct inputs from an intelligence that exists outside our desktop environment, manipulating our cognitive software directly.
Which brings us directly to the control system hypothesis, proposed by the legendary ufologist and computer scientist Jacques Vallée. Vallée looked at decades of historical data and mythology and said, maybe UAP are not ships at all. Maybe they are highly symbolic archetypal displays. He called it a trickster phenomenon. Vallée theorized they function as a self-regulating cultural mechanism, a control system that uses absurd shifting displays to bypass our physical sensors and operate directly on human perception. The goal isn't to invade us. It's to gradually alter human behavior, myths, and paradigms over generations.
It frames the phenomenon as a psychological and sociological mechanism rather than purely an aerospace one. And we can connect this interface and control system concept to some of the most chilling historical data points, the strategic nuclear site incidents. The most famous is the 1967 incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana.
Walk us through what happened there.
Military personnel reported glowing, disc-like UAP hovering directly over the highly secure underground strategic nuclear missile silos. And as the objects hovered, multiple Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles, the very core of the U.S. nuclear deterrent, abruptly powered down. 10 ICBMs went offline simultaneously, dropping into an unlaunchable no-go state.
10 nuclear missiles disabled at once. And the conventional explanation is what? A localized power surge.
A power surge or a cabling fault? But investigators could never definitively find a conventional cause that would affect all 10 independent systems simultaneously in that specific manner. Under Valley's control system hypothesis, we ask a different question. Was this a targeted electronic attack using directed energy to fry the hardware? Or was it a symbolic interface warning?
A message.
Yes. Was an intelligence projecting an icon onto our desktop, interacting directly with human military networks to deliver a clear psychological message about the dangers of nuclear weapons?
It's profound because it shifts the entire investigation from what is the propulsion system to what is the message. But there's another outlier model that bridges the gap between physics and consciousness, and that is nonlinear temporality, time itself. Let's go back to the Nimitz encounter one more time. The Tic Tac knew Commander Fravor's highly classified CCAP point before he even flew there. How did it anticipate him? Let's explore J.W. Dunn's concept of serial time.
This maps a speculative hierarchy of how different intelligences might perceive time.
Exactly. I want to use an analogy for different dimensions of time, alpha, beta, and gamma time. We human beings live in level alpha. We experience time strictly linearly, moving forward second by second. It's like sitting in a theater watching a movie frame by frame. The past is fixed, the future is completely unknown, and we are trapped in the continuous present.
Alpha time.
Now imagine a level beta intelligence. This is like having a digital DVR for reality. A beta being can fast forward, rewind, or hop to a specific scene within their established timeline. Think of the Tesseract scene at the end of the movie Interstellar, where Matthew McConaughey's character can access any point in his daughter's timeline from a fixed spatial room.
They experience a non-linear progression. They can scrub through the timeline to gather information.
Right. And then at the absolute top, you have level gamma. A gamma intelligence doesn't scrub through the timeline. They lay the entire film strip of reality out on a glowing light table. They stand completely outside the simulation of time. They view the entire chronology of the universe, past, present, and future simultaneously, as a cohesive, static landscape. They can look down and see the whole map at once.
Now, apply that gamma-level perception back to the UAP observables, specifically the anticipation of military maneuvers. If an intelligence operates at level gamma, it doesn't need to hack our encrypted radios or intercept radar signals to know where Commander Fravor's CCAP point is. It perfectly anticipates the intercept route because it can already see the future trajectory of our military communications on the timeline map.
Because it's already there.
Exactly. It knows where the pilot will go because, from its perspective, the pilot has already gone there. The event is fixed on the landscape.
It explains the evasion. We constantly hear reports that these things vanish exactly when our sensors are looking away, or right before a missile lock is achieved. It looks like magic anticipation to us down in level alpha. But to them in level gamma, they're just stepping around obstacles on a static map.
It is a brilliant, philosophically satisfying synthesis of the data. However, as an analyst, I must draw a sharp line of comparison regarding credibility and scientific utility. We have discussed Tier 3 metric engineering, Tier 4 brain cosmology, and these outlier consciousness and temporal models. We have to compare their scientific footing.
Right, getting back to the science.
Metric engineering and brain cosmology, while highly speculative and currently untestable due to energy requirements, are mathematically rigorous. They are deeply rooted in quantum field theory and general relativity. They use the math we already possess.
So they are playing by the rules of physics, just stretching them.
Exactly. Consciousness-based models and the alpha, beta, gamma temporal frameworks, while philosophically profound and excellent at explaining the high strangeness of the encounters, challenge physicalist science entirely. They assume that reality is fundamentally mental, or that time is an illusion we can step outside of, because they challenge the very foundation of objective physical measurement. They are incredibly difficult, if not fundamentally impossible, to empirically test or falsify using current scientific methods.
And this brings up the ultimate scientific problem, doesn't it? Science requires falsifiability. For a theory to be scientific, there must be a way to prove it wrong. If I say a ghost lives in my attic, but the ghost is invisible, silent, and intangible, you can't prove me wrong. But it's also not science. If these UAP theories are ever going to move from late-night, mind-bending speculation to actual textbook science, we need hard, testable data. We can't just rely on pilot stories and philosophical analogies about computer desktops.
That is the most crucial realization of this entire subject. To accept any exotic hypothesis into mainstream science, we must define strict falsification criteria and identify specific physical signatures. We cannot rely on eyewitnesses, no matter how credible. We need multi-sensor, multi-platform, co-registered data. We need hard numbers. And for each of the theories we've discussed, theoretical physics tells us exactly what those numbers and signatures should look like.
Okay, this is where rubber meets the road. If we want to prove these aren't balloons, what specific physical signatures do our instruments need to record? Let's start with spacetime and metric engineering, the Alcubierre warp bubble. What is the signature?
For an Alcubierre-style warp drive, we must look for measurable gravitational lensing. If a craft is distorting the local metric, it will distort passing light and radar signals. Astronomical observatories should detect a measurable gravitational redshift or blue shift in the electromagnetic radiation emitting from the object. Furthermore, we must look for localized time dilation.
How do you measure time dilation on a flying object?
You use atomic clocks. If you were to place highly accurate atomic clocks near the perimeter of the suspected warped region, you would measure a microscopic but verifiable discrepancy in the passage of time relative to an outside observer outside the bubble. And finally, if the bubble travels at an apparent faster than light speed, it should generate Cherenkov radiation.
Okay, I need an ELI 5 on Cherenkov radiation. What is that?
Cherenkov radiation is essentially a sonic boom, but for light. Light travels slower through a medium like water or air than it does in a vacuum. If a highly energetic particle travels through that medium faster than light can travel through that same medium, it creates a shockwave of electromagnetic radiation.
Like a light boom.
Yes. It's why the water inside a nuclear reactor glows a distinct, eerie blue. If a UAP is manipulating the metric to achieve apparent superluminal speeds, it should leave a distinct, measurable cascade of high-energy particles, a blue flash resulting from the metric disturbance.
So we need spectrometers looking for light shifts, atomic clocks tracking time, and sensors looking for that blue Cherenkov flash. What about higher dimensional projections? The flatland scenario. How do you measure an 11-dimensional object?
If an object is intersecting our three-brane from the 11-dimensional bulk, we must detect microgravitational anomalies. Remember the closed strings, the gravitons leaking into the bulk? Because of that leakage, the object should produce highly localized, anomalous gravitational fluctuations that simply do not match its visible 3D volume or mass.
Like it's too heavy for its size.
Exactly. An instrument might register an object the size of a car, but detect the gravitational pull of a skyscraper, or vice versa. Additionally, instruments should detect signatures of higher dimensional fields collapsing into our reality.
What does a field collapsing look like to a machine?
In Clues-Klein theory, when extra dimensions shift or collapse back down, that energy has to go somewhere in our 3D space. It dumps into our reality as a dilaton field manifestation, which would register on our sensors as sudden, highly localized, unexplained electromagnetic bursts.
We need gravimeters and advanced electromagnetic field detectors, not just cameras. Okay, and finally, what about the outliers? The consciousness and temporal interfaces. Can we even test for a gamma-level intelligence or an evolutionary desktop glitch?
It is the hardest to test, but not fundamentally impossible if we change our approach. We need to shift our focus from observing the sky to observing the observer. We must look for neurological correlates in human witnesses during encounters. Are there highly synchronized, atypical neurofunctional patterns?
Wait, measuring the pilot's brains?
Yes. For instance, using portable EEG monitors, do we see intense gamma-band brainwave bursts in the right parietal cortex of a pilot that correlate exactly with the appearance of the anomaly? To test nonlinear time, we need to look for quantum retrocausality signatures.
Quantum retrocausality. That sounds like a contradiction. How can an effect happen before the cause?
In quantum mechanics, observing a particle collapses its wave function from a state of probability into a definite state. Retrocausality suggests that a future event can affect a past state. It's as if the particle knows you are going to look at it tomorrow, so it changes its behavior today. If a UAP intelligence is navigating time nonlinearly, attempts to predict its location using standard algorithms will fail. But we could set up quantum random number generators in areas of high UAP activity.
How does a random number generator catch a UFO?
Because a true quantum random number generator relies on the unpredictable decay of isotopes. If the intelligence is truly anticipating the future and manipulating reality at a fundamental level, the proximity of that intelligence might skew the quantum probability. We might register anomalous quantum state collapses or a massive disruption in the random probability curve right before the object physically appears in that location.
The numbers would stop being random seconds before the UAP arrives.
Oh!
That is absolutely wild. So, synthesizing all this, does this mean the reason we haven't solved this mystery yet isn't necessarily because the phenomenon is magic or impossible, but simply because we have been pointing the wrong tools at it? We've been pointing optical cameras and standard radar at the sky when we should be pointing atomic clocks, gravimeters, quantum random number generators, and EEG brain scanners at the phenomena.
I affirm that completely. The absence of definitive evidence might just be an absence of the correct instruments. We are trying to measure a quantum anomaly with a yardstick. Until the scientific community deploys instruments specifically calibrated to detect metric manipulation, extradimensional gravity leakage, or retrocausal temporal shifts, we will remain in the dark, arguing over blurry thermal videos.
Wow. Let's take a breath and recap the massive journey we've just taken. If you've been listening, we started in the mundane reality of Tier 1 and Tier 2. We looked at the math of parallax illusions, the mechanical rotations of camera gimbals, and the bleeding-edge deception of laser-induced plasma holograms.
The necessary baseline.
But when the data refused to fit, we ascended. We searched the space-time waves of the Alcubierre metric, exploring how a craft could glide silently inside a zero-G warp bubble. We peeked into the 11th dimension of string theory, realizing we might just be 2D flatlanders watching 4D spheres intersect our reality. And we questioned the very nature of human consciousness, asking if UAP are navigating a gamma-level timeline map to hack our evolutionary desktop interface.
It is a vast hypothesis space. And it is vital to remember why traversing this space matters. Even if 99% of all UAP reports eventually resolve into mundane weather balloons and electronic warfare spoofing, the theoretical frameworks we have discussed today are not science fiction. General relativity, quantum field theory, higher dimensional mathematics, and the cognitive science of perception. These are the very tools that will define the next century of human progress.
Why should you care? Because anomalies, the hard residue of data that absolutely refuses to fit our current models, are just tomorrow's physics waiting to be understood.
Yeah.
Dark matter was an anomaly. The strange orbit of Mercury was a frustrating anomaly until Einstein's general relativity came along and perfectly explained it. Science doesn't advance when everything works perfectly. We advance by looking at what breaks our rules.
Precisely. Science does not advance by ignoring the data that makes us uncomfortable. It advances by building better, more specific instruments to measure the impossible.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. It builds on Jacques Vallée's control system and Donald Hoffman's interface theory. We talk about how human perception might just be a simplified desktop interface designed by evolution purely to keep us alive, hiding the true complexity of reality. And we speculated that UAP might be anomalies interacting with that interface. So what happens when our science advances enough to finally hack our own interface? If we build the gravimeters and the quantum sensors, if we learn to see past the desktop icons of our 3D reality, what will we find waiting for us in the underlying code? Are UAP actively evading us, or are they just patiently waiting for us to evolve the sensory and physics vocabulary required to finally see them for what they truly are?